Okay, let's do this. So we are currently in Chapter 11 of the Coscopane. That was last week we started Chapter 11. We skipped forward from where we left off last semester, which was entirely dealing with root position stuff. Now we're going to deal with situations where we're going to start inverting our chords. So instead of the bottom note of the harmony, the bass voice, being the root of the chord, then sometimes we use the third of the chord. Last week, we did a bit of a class composition with inversions, but we didn't really go much over it. We didn't quite have the time. So that's why I have taken all of this information the book has, and we'll be going back and forth between the book and these notes that I've made. So first thing I want you to see is that in the book, they wrote this nice little composition that was really simple. It was 1, 7, 1, 4, 2, 5, 1. So basically, they've got the 4 to the 2 chord, which is the same function, but they both want to lead to 5. 5, 1 at the end, an embellishment of the tonic triad here with a leading tone chord in between, which has the same function as 5, but leads via half step. 1, do, ti, do, and then fa, re, so, do. They've got this real simple root position thing. So how did they get there? I've summarized all of their stuff in a more succinct way over here on this thing, on the notes that we have for the class. This is a review, but also it's being presented in a way we haven't talked. So this is all everything that we have in the book, but I've done it in a more succinct way, and it's a lot more information than we've actually covered in class. In class, I wanted us to dive into writing the things on the page. That was what last week's 3 class periods were supposed to be in the one day that we actually met. We're going to start off when we write a bass line, writing it unembellished. Simple terms, just like the book has here, just root position. That's it. Nothing fancy. If we start in SATB composition with the bass voice, we have to do something before we do that, which is writing a short, simple chord progression. So if in doubt, make that chord progression combinations of 1, 4, and 5. Then replace one of the 4s with a 2, maybe even insert a 2 after a 4 or before a 4. Usually after, and then maybe take a 5 chord and turn it into a 7. So what the book did, they elaborated on this 1 chord with a 7 chord. So tonic, leading tone, tonic, do, ti, do. And then they went 4, 5, 1, but they added a 2 chord in between the 4 and the 5. It's not even worth playing on the piano. It's not very interesting. That's the whole point of what we're doing. So it's using the same exact chords I said here, which was use 1, 4, and 5, throw in a 2 chord, throw in a leading tone chord. So if we were going to just use 1, 4, and 5, it'd be 1, 5, 1, 4, 5, 1. As for length, we're going to start with a 4-measure phrase. Phrases typically happen in multiples of 4 measures. Now the book says 6 measures is also an option. Not sure why. I guess it's an alternative to doing 8 measures. Nathan. The rate at which chords change. Use half notes in 4/4 time, just like they're doing here. The chord will change on every strong beats. So 1, 3, 1, 3, and nothing else fancy. Later on, if we want to take like a root position chord and follow it up with its own inversion, then we could either give it its own time of day, have them both happen in the same measure, or we could actually use the same harmonic rhythm of say a 1 chord, and then follow it up with, on beat 2, an inverted 1 chord. Those are both options. In one case, treat them as the same chord, and the other, give them both their own space. So harmonic rhythm is how much the chords change. How many beats does each chord get? For example, a lot of hymns, most hymns tend to be quarter note, quarter note, quarter note, quarter note, quarter note. But in this case, we're using half notes in 4/4. With the key, we're going to use simple major and minor keys. I think the first example we'll do will be a major key, then we'll complicate things with a minor key. The beginning and ending of the phrase is going to be either on the tonic or dominant triads. The example here is a tonic triad ending on a tonic triad. If you begin on the dominant triad, start on beat 3 like your mid-thought. That's a common thing that happens in chorales. But we're going to focus on beginning and ending on root position. Don't invert any chords while you're doing all of this. So just like they did here, 1, 7, 1, 4, 2, 5, 1 is do, ti, do, fa, re, so, do. Exactly the same bass note solfege as there is the solfege of the chords themselves. The bass line follows exactly the scale degrees associated with the chords you've chosen. Next is range. The bass note should stay between E2, which is a ledger line below the bass staff, and C4, which is a ledger line above. Avoid leaps larger than a fifth whenever possible. Sixths, they can happen, but beyond that, we'll get more into that later. So now we get to step 2. Some chords will always be root position is step 2. So you've done step 1. That's root position, 4 measures, ending on the downbeat of the 4th measure. Some chords are always root position, so the first and the last chord needs to be root position. So what they've done here is they've circled this first chord and this last chord. Those are going to stay root position. We're not messing with that. Next, if you end a phrase with 5-1, 5 should also be root position. So what they've done here is they've circled this scale degree 5. We're not going to move it. So these 3 notes that are circled, we're not moving them because it's the first and last chord of the phrase, and also 5-1 means root position 5. Next, Deceptive Motion. If in our chord progression, they didn't do it, but if in our chord progression we go so, la, meaning 5 to 6 in the progression, it's Deceptive Motion. Whether it's the end of a phrase and we're doing it as a cadence, a deceptive cadence, or whether it's just somewhere in the chord progression, we're going to make sure we don't invert 6. The reason is the third of 6 is do, and if this part goes so do, that communicates 5-1 and not 5-6. And in a second, I'll put that in the Sibelius example, and you'll hear it. It just sounds like a modified 1 chord when you do that. So if you ever do 5-6 in your chord progression, they both need to be root position, or at the very least, the 6th chord needs to. Some chords will be inverted, so that's where we get into circling certain notes that are going to be inverted. The first thing off the bat, and almost everything will be shaped by this, any diminished chords, which is leading tone chord, and in minor, the 2 chord, or the supertonic, needs to be inverted to lessen the dissonance of the diminished triad. So right here, they've got a leading tone chord and a 2 chord, so it's almost like they chose a minor key for a reason, because leading tone and 2 are diminished. So they took the F sharp, and they went up to the A, which is the third of 7. And then they took the ACE chord, and they switched over to the C, the third of that chord. And then the only other, actual must when it comes to inversion is any internal 5-1 progression is non-cadential, so we're not going to use both of them in root position. Why? Because, hey, look, so do sounds like a cadence. We're going to invert one of them, but not necessarily both. Inverting both is far less common, but unlike the Koska I'll allow it. It's sometimes nice to hear, especially in choral compositions. Just ask Eric Whitaker. Next, step 4, improving the contour. So now that we've done these things with step 3, where we've inverted 7, diminished 2, and we've inverted into something in an eternal 5-1 progression, we're going to check out what has this done to our contour. So let's take a look at what this did to the contour of the progression. Remember, they went do, ti, do, fa, re, so, do. Then they decided that the beginning do and the ending so, do is not going to move. Then they saw that 7 and 2 being diminished means we need to invert. So do, re, do, fa, fa, so, do. Ti inverts to re up a third, and then re goes up to fa. Now the issue here is this repeated C. If inverting a chord in step 3 results in a note being repeated, invert the other notes as well. So instead of going C, C, they're inverting to E flat, C. So this E flat is the third of a C, E flat, G chord, and this C is the third of an A, C, E flat chord. Or in simpler terms, C, E, G, A, C, E. We go with the third of both of those, or else we're repeating the C's. So up here we've got the repeated C's, and down here we've got the third of C being an inversion. Now what else? Do we have any focal point issues? So we don't follow every rule of common practice melodic composition in bass parts, but we try to follow as many as we can. So we try to avoid repeating an upper or lower focal point within the phrase. So the issue here is, now that we've really taken a critical look at what's going on and we've gotten all these inversions, the glaring problem is a repetition of the lower focal point of this phrase. Having this E flat here is not a problem because there's no other E flats, but this G, 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 the way that we fix it, as with all problems, and I'm sure there's a meme for this, throw first inversion at the problem and see if it goes away. So if you look right here, If you invert the G chord, then you end up with Do, Re, Mi. If inverting a chord in step 3 results in the note being repeated, invert the other chord and then focal point. That's where we're at. It's also a tonal variety issue. You're repeating a note too much, which is number 4. Similar to focal points, if you just find that a note keeps happening too much, which is not going to happen in this one, we've moved too many notes around, but if you end up where a note just keeps happening, just invert the chord somewhere. So the example would be, in this case, E flat, G, B flat, and C, E flat, G. Let's just use alphabet letters to keep things simple. If I have an E, G, B chord and a C, E, G chord, and they're happening a lot, and I've inverted the C, E, G chord a few times, so now the bass line keeps saying E over and over, I should probably invert one or more E chords. That way we kind of split that load between E and G. Let's go back. These are load-bearing walls, Jerry. Convert large leaps. When we start out in step 1, we avoided leaps larger than a fifth. However, we've been messing with stuff. We've been messing with stuff like crazy. Now, this composition's nice and neat. There's nothing more to fix. But if while we were working on this and we meticulously crafted this perfect line of only a perfect fifth right here and nothing else larger, and then we get to the end results, and we've got these leaps larger than a fifth, we might need to drop some octaves or raise some octaves. Keep the same letter name, either go up or down with the problem notes, which is either the beginning or end of the leap. So now let's move forward to the optional step 5. These are corner cases. They don't come up much, but double check that you didn't just mess up your range. If dropping notes or raising notes has messed with your range, or inverting notes has messed with your range, make sure you're still between the ledger lines, the single ledger lines of the bass staff. And then following a leap, just like how we wanted to follow focal point issues in melodic composition with our bass part, since it is a melody, go ahead and make sure that any large leaps, if you can, that you follow up by a step, if you can. The difficulty is, the only way you can fix it is, again, oh, it's the meme with the guy with the duct tape on the water tank.
Yeah,
slap first inversion on it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If you can, slap first inversion on something following a leap to fix the problem, go for it. Otherwise, it's optional. It's frills. Dissonant intervals. This is just sort of an overall, if you end up with dissonant intervals, melodies are going to try to avoid them entirely, but bass lines can actually use diminished intervals. And the reason we can use diminished intervals as opposed to augmented or anything else like that is that they resolve inward. The tendency is inward, be it a flat wants to go down or sharp wants to go up. The example here is E flat to B natural is actually diminished fourth, which is nasty, but it's a thing that happens sometimes. Me, ti, do. And then fa, ti, do is another option, to diminish fifth. You're not going to do those in melodies, but bass lines you can do it. And it's that tendency of upward resolution, of being the leading tone. And then the inflection of a augmented interval is resolution outwards, so we avoid it unless we're singing The Simpsons or Maria from West Side Story or things like that. And then finally, one more frill. If you ever have a line where you invert 4, you invert 5, and then you have 1, use melodic minor. So instead of la, ti, do, use la, ti, do. It's going to change the quality of the 4 chord to major, and it's a frill that will never come up, but it's something that I have to mention, because it's in the book. So do, la, ti, do. And the reason that we had an inverted 5 chord is because it was an internal 5-1. Now we're at the new material, which is composing a counterpoint to the bass line, which is fancy talk for writing a melody. This is the chapter on bass soprano counterpoint, which is our basis for writing an SATB composition. So first off, a very quick summary of the most important common practice rules of melodic composition. Fit the chords. That's an easy one, right? If you got chords, your melody and chords, your bass part, they all got to be part of that chord. Furthermore, the bass part's going to only be roots and thirds of those chords. The melody can be anything, root, third, or fifth. So the easiest thing is start out with a Roman numeral chord progression, which is what we talked about before, 1, 7, 1, 4, 2, 5, 1, which is all derived from 1, 5, 1, 4, 5, 1. That was the example in the book for the unembellished bass line. Make sure that each note of the melody fits those chords and follows the same harmonic rhythm as the bass. If you start out by writing the melody, which for some people is more difficult, if you like writing nice contoured melodies and you don't have a problem, then matching that, playing matchmaker between your melody and a chord progression, go for it. Most people need to start off with a plan before they write the melody. Favor using steps over constant skips and leaps, but don't let the line be stagnant. Avoid letting the contour pull too far in one direction. So it's a lot of course correction as you're writing a nice contour. Variety and repetition, so don't use the same pitches too many times across a single phrase. That might sound familiar. And also, you can repeat a note, say CC. You can state it twice in a row, but don't do that over a bar line, like beat 4 or beat 3 or whatever is a C, and then the next measure begins with a C. You want to do it in the same measure. And if we're doing half notes, then it would just be C, C in the same measure. Focal point, we've already talked about. The lowest and highest focal point shouldn't be repeated, except like at the beginning and end. Maybe sometimes your lower focal point is Do, which is something we've allowed in extreme circumstances. But if you're ever like, how do I fix it? Well, try adding the leading tone into the phrase. That's a way to elaborate on Do, while also not having a repeated focal point. Now T is your lower focal point. And then keep the melody between the notes A3 and E4. That is 2 ledger lines below the staff in the top space of the staff. However, the actual melodic phrase should only be within a fifth to a tenth, or octave plus third. So you don't get to use that full octave plus fifth of A3 to E4. Whereas with bass, it's like, whatever, make them do stuff. So we want to keep it at least a fifth in size, because that's a pentascale and that's interesting, but we don't want to go too far. So octave plus third is our limit, and main thing is stay between A3 and E4. Every year I've got to stamp out all these melodies that have like really, really high notes, and they're like, I don't know what to do, it keeps going up. And I'm like, well, have you tried not doing that? There are other rules you might recall, such as tendency tones, ascending melodic minor, avoiding dissonant leaps or leaps larger than an octave, following a leap up by a step in the opposite direction, consecutive skips or leaps outlining a triad. So to give you a little bit more review detail, the tendency tones is leading tones go up to 1, and scale degree 4 goes down to 3. The only exceptions be if we're doing scales that kind of go against that. So like Do, Ti, La, So, or if we're going Do, Re, Mi, Fa, So, obviously we're not going to hit a wall when we reach scale degree 4. We're going to keep going. We're not going to always go 1, 2, 3, 4, 3 in our melodies. The 4 to 3 tendency is actually not something you worry about in bass lines, because 4, 5, 1 is very common in bass lines. We've already talked about ascending melodic minor, that we want to smooth out So, La, Ta, Do into So, La, Ti, Do. And then avoiding dissonant leaps is augmented and diminished intervals, or sevenths. And we don't want to leap higher than an octave. Technically, if we leap an octave itself, it's really just an octave transfer of a note. Now, we would want to follow it by a step in the opposite direction, but it's not a problem. Consecutive skips and leaps outlining a triad. If we're doing consecutive steps and leaps, we want to go no more than an octave total, and we want it to outline a triad. So we don't want to go C, E, G, B, because that's a 7th chord. We don't want to go C, F, B, because that's consecutive fourths. That's not a triad, but any combination of notes that forms a triad in any so-called inversion spanning an octave is fine. So we're going to do an example in C major. I'm going to go 1, 4, 5, 1, 4, 5, 1. Isn't it fascinating?
Wow, this is revolutionary. No one's ever done this before.
No, I'm the first.
I've never heard 1, 4, 5, 1 ever. Oh my gosh.
I'm the first. Am I good at playing along?
Totally, yeah.
So there we go. Given the context, C 1, 4, 5, 1, 4, 5, 1. So what's the next thing? We need to throw in some 2 and 7s. So I'm going to end the chord progression with 2, 5, 1. Let's go ahead and get scale degree 2 in there. And we need leading tone. And let's see. Actually, I think I'm going to go 4, 5, 1 here. Because it's smoother to go 2, 7, 1. You dig? So Do, Re, Ti, Do, 1, 2, 7, 1, 4, 5, 1. So 4 is being substituted for the chord a third below it, and 5 is being substituted by a chord a third above it, which is what you might call common practice. Let's work our way through the steps, shall we? The first thing is C, G, C are not going to change. Next, we're going to invert our diminished chord, and there's no internal 5/1s, so that's good. And next, we repeated re, re as a result. So we're going to invert the 2 chord. Do, fa, re, do, fa, so, do. So the problem is we're using fa twice. So we're going to invert 4. Yeah, done. We just did the whole thing. So I'm going to have the class and Sarah walk me through the next one. I'm going to do a very simple chord progression in A minor. We're going to go 1, 2, 5. I'm just going to do something simple. We're just going to go same thing we did before. 1, 4, 5, 1, 4, 5, 1. Okay, now let's do some substitutions here. Let's do a Deceptive Motion, 5, 6. And then we need to have a 2 chord in here somewhere. Let's do it here.
Yeah, I was just about to say.
Yeah, that's a nice line right there. Obligatory, I put it in root position even though we all know I'm about to invert the 2 chord. Okay. So Tori, tell me which 3 chords here are not going to be inverted. I'll give her 20 seconds and then Sarah can try the steal.
I'm gonna win $1 million. I got this.
Well, I didn't say that.
Oh, dang it. I thought this was a game show. My bad.
Alright, Sarah for the steal. Which 3 chords in this A minor progression are not going to be inverted?
The first one, the last one, and then the 5 right before it.
Yes. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that the first and last chord are root position, and that if we're ending 5/1, that it stays 5/1 rather than any inversions in there. When we talk about imperfect authentic cadence being that either 5 or 1 could be inverted, it is a thing. It's just overall when we're writing our bass lines, we try not to invert either of them. We try to go for the PAC as often as we can, or we want the PAC to be from the melody, not finishing an line as opposed to doing anything with inversions. Which of these chords definitely needs to get inverted? Alright, Sarah, for the steal, which chord needs to be inverted?
The 5! Smack dab in the middle.
The internal 5/6?
No. Oh, wait. I thought that was a 5. Ah! I misread it. Oh no!
Such confidence. Well, let's go back to the notes, shall we? Okay, we're going to step 2. Oh, step 3, sorry. Step 3. Some chords must be inverted. Diminished triads, the use of leading tone or diminished 2, unique to minor, requires inversion to lessen the dissonance.
Can I try again?
So which one of these chords gets inverted?
That 2!
Yep. Diminished 2 gets
the one
inverted.
that we had talked about inverting before.
And how do I indicate that this BDF chord has been inverted?
You do the 6 and then you actually invert it.
So what note should it be?
It should be a D.
Yes. Real quick, I'm going to do something really nice for my students. I'm currently going through both these chord progressions, notes that correspond with the scale degrees of the chords themselves. So like the unembellished bass line, right? And then I'm going to make sure that none of the notes go too high. And then I'm going to make triads. And that way we know what notes are in each chord. So this inverted D chord, this F, you'll notice is right here. That's the 3rd of the chord, therefore inversion. So this BDF chord, since it's inverted, it's the D. And then we inverted this 4 chord, FAC, A is in the bass. Next, we inverted this BDF chord again. Let's drop it down. And now, instead of B being the bass note, since we invert it, now it's the 3rd, D. What other things can or shouldn't be inverted? Deceptive Motion. We want to make sure that 6 is not inverted. So check it out. We didn't invert 6. Here's what it would sound like. This is very fast. Slow that down. Okay, I'm going to do something down here. I'm going to do this same chord progression in C major. So you can hear the problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's so do, resulting from an inverted 6 chord. It's a CEG chord is a C chord. See right here, CEG. But so do really, really implies 5-1. So we're expecting this. So when we hear this, kind of sounds like this chord. Sounds like a jazz chord. It sounds like a C add 6. So we're not going to do that. Go away. All right.
Be gone.
Internal 5 to 6 is going to be root position, at least the 6th chord, if not both of them. Are we missing anything else? Because I'm seeing focal point's not an issue. The D happens twice, but if I were to invert this DFA chord, then we're repeating a focal point. So we can't invert the 6th chord, so I'm not seeing any actual issue here that needs to be fixed. So it would imply that there's no problems. Now there's going to be some unique issues going root 4, root 5, root 6. We'd have to get really creative. We'd have to get real creative with our voicings to avoid certain issues like parallel everythings. This is what you would end up doing. And we haven't really covered resolution of 5 to 6 just yet. That's towards the end of the semester, so don't worry about that. So we're going to go back to just everything being root position, because I want you to be able to visualize alphabet letters. A, C, E, D, F, A, and so forth. All we did at the end of the lecture before the examples was we reviewed the rules of melodic composition, because we're not ready yet to write that melody. That's the next lecture, because we want the melody and the bass part to cooperate in certain ways, and not too much. Okay, Sarah, do you have any questions?
I'm good now that I didn't misread.
It's been 2 years since you've had this lecture. If you had any questions that came up.
This actually cleared up a bunch of stuff with it. Whenever we first learned this, I was always like, I kind of like had a deer in the headlights kind of thing whenever it came to figuring out what chords to do. So the step-by-step, like, do a bunch of 1, 4, 5, 1, 1, 4, 5, 1, and then, like, add this and this and this. Like, it makes sense now.
Hearing it said after 2 years' time, sometimes you're just like, oh, I'm sure you said it that way before, but now I'm hearing it.
Yeah, now that it's not 8 a.m. and I'm not completely sleep deprived.
You're not joking. But we got 3 more pages to do for chapter 11. We're going to actually put soprano over bass in ways that they cooperate, but not too much. They're still going to wear their masks.
If y'all need help with your musictheory.net or homework, I'm stuck at home. I can help. I can do Zoom or Discord.
I'll see you all later.
Bye, guys.